Dearest Jemy, I can't help but laugh with joy when I see what a savvy businesswoman you are becoming. Our weird little band of nobles will do well by you, I am sure. You can pay me back at your leisure. I'm sure you've heard the rumors that the family spreads about me, and some of them, at least 10, maybe 15%, are true. While I don't expect to be able to buy a planet anytime soon, doting on one of my favorite relatives with a small loan isn't going to cause me any hardships either. Your calendar idea had me practically rolling. It's such a unique way to make a few credits that I'm surprised I didn't think of it myself. Of course, if it was all males, it would be indecent, but with you girls at the helm, I'm sure you can ride the line between tasteful and cheeky. Though it has been a long time since you last saw him, you may still remember your Uncle Stace. He is often my source when I need information about pre-liberation human culture, and happened to be on Earth when I received your message. I decided to have a conversation over drinks with him about what he described as pin-ups. He told me that such calendars were incredibly common in his youth, though they became far less common in the decade or so before the shill arrived. They were often seen in blue-collar places of employment, a category of people who generally worked with their hands. You would never see one of these calendars in, say, a doctor's office, but any garage, mechanic shop, or other manufacturer would be rife with them. Men would often have out-of-date calendars featuring naked women pinned to the inside of their lockers, or toolbox lids. Stace's father was one of these people. He was a mechanic who often fixed equipment for farmers, and would often receive such calendars as promotional material from tool and part suppliers. Your uncle is pretty sure he has quite a few of them in storage somewhere. He hasn't looked at any of them since his parents passed away, but vintage nude pictures like that are now often seen as a very pricey collector's item. He said that I could have them if I wanted, but I declined. Primarily because if Stace knew I gave my niece what amounts to pornography, he would murder me. Regardless, I think you will be surprised with how well the physical copies sell, particularly if you make sure there's a way that people can purchase them anonymously. Many of those that decry your actions publicly will be your greatest supporters privately, and sometimes the best thing you can do to those who stand in your way is to very politely rob them blind. Please give your family my affection, and let me know how else I can help you in your endeavors. Uncle Jemy. There were some things to consider, and Jemy read the letter a second time. Savvy was promising, and with full payment already speeding back to him, plus a profit, that should settle things. The year before graduation, she would definitely ask him for a job on Earth. She hadn't thought about Stace. She'd just been 4 years old when she'd seen him last, and she'd hung around him the whole visit. She remembered walks in the woods, and the stories from Ayan and Marin had all seemed like a wild adventure. She understood now what she hadn't then, but for Stace, they would have died in the frozen wilderness. Nude made her blush. She'd never thought of that. Goddess, it was just a good way to market the bikini, but nude? She'd never... The word vintage was interesting. Vintage hung around right after collectible, and just before valuable antique. Would calendar sales go well on Earth? Would Jemy be able to send her another 2 shipments of silk? The distance involved was frustrating. Still, covert advertising would be useful. Something direct. Alright, if it was on someone's omnipad, that was private-ish, but it still linked the product to her silk company. If the bikini calendars went badly, it could hurt silk sales, so something would need to be done. It should be easy enough, once she had the right idea. She closed down the letter, snuggling in under the blanket. It was colder every day now, though Professor Warwick seemed to be enjoying himself. He was getting stronger every day, and it was pretty neat. There was talk all around the campus. Girls were asking her questions like when she'd first gotten into his class, and again after he'd taught marriage fundamentals. What would Stace think of Warwick? Nesfa was going to ask him about an interview tomorrow. After that was movie night. But then it was Shell. And there was the visit. And Belda was already in a state. Goddess! She hoped nothing went wrong. Desala listened, as Professor Pelavon ended her part of the class, discussing relations between the Empire and Cambria. That was fine. Everyone knew the stories. It was almost mythic at this point. Everyone on both sides seemed larger than life. It was also normal. At the time, it made her glad she shoved the whole bag of Plivar crisps into her bag, instead of setting them out for everyone in the class. She'd arrived early, the classroom empty. It would have been easy to just put one at each of the chairs as an anonymous treat. No more having to think about humiliating herself to the others to get on their good side. No trying to curry favour. But she hadn't done it. She couldn't. Instead, she shoved the bag down into her carry satchel, crushing them. The part of her brain not concentrating on the class tried telling her she hadn't lost her nerve. That would have meant she intended to poison everyone, even if only a little. But she wasn't a murderer, not even just a little. Her mother's argued non-stop now, but was sticking with the billing error story. Refunds had gone out. As a cover, it was thin as sea foam, but it was done. If anyone, like the person who supplied that powder, poked a hole in it, it could burst. But at least the financial damage was fixed now. The damage to her house and the company, maybe it would take the rest of her life to put right. But after weighing the risks, once you gave in to something like that, they had you for life. Maybe she'd have to live with the humiliation, but no one was going to put her life in chains and yank whenever they felt like it. Shoving the crisps into her satchel and crushing them into bits had felt like the right choice. At the time, she'd been proud of herself. Well, into Professor Warwick's part of the class, she wasn't so sure. It was infuriating. Compare and contrast could go to the deep. There was no doubt in her mind the human loathed what the Imperium stood for, and it made her blood boil. Maybe poisoning him just a little wouldn't have hurt. The human date was 1910, and Warwick had been comparing the annexation of a landmass called Korea by the Empire of Japan. Finally, an honest-to-goddess empire, and Warwick was talking it down. The comparisons to Cambria were weak at best. She could pick them apart in any test easily, but the continued criticism made her see blue. Maybe it was not having given out the crisps. The threat hanging over her was gone, and she felt relieved for the first time in a week. Maybe it was the anger after all the strain, but when Warwick finally asked for questions, her hand was up. Yes, Desala? Professor, I need to protest. Sitting up a little straighter in her seat, she cleared her throat. She wanted to make this count. You said humans have lived under monarchies throughout your history, but I feel like this is just another put-down about the Empire. That certainly wasn't my intention, Desala. Warwick had spent most of the class leaning against his desk, trying to mimic his usual relaxed demeanor. He pursed his lips in thought. Empires can create grand achievements, but they can make colossal missteps as well. The Imperium nearly did well with Cambria and Sevastopol. The Japanese certainly did with the Koreans. When the Imperium arrived a century later, there still wasn't a complete closure between the two. Fine, but isn't this more about Earth than the Cambrians? She drew in a deep breath. Cambria and Sevastopol weren't a different people. They were legitimate Imperial colonies that tried to break away. And yet, they have their own cultural identity. I've only met one Cambrian, so I know there's not much of a sample, but Professor Ramirez is definitely his own kind of person. Professor Pelavon might have snorted as he continued. Cambria and Sevastopol as independent prefectures within the Imperium is probably one of the best outcomes you could have. What happened in Korea over the next 20 short years is proof of a world of worse alternatives. Then why? She pursued the question. Even some of the other girls were nodding. Maybe. She was standing up for the Imperium, after all. This is one isolated incident, after all. Yes and no. Warwick shook his head. I'm going to teach the coming years in the spring class, but 1910 was the start of a really bad era. The annexation of Korea could be called the start of our Second World War, and the First War didn't officially start until 1914. This was an opening move. Events have a momentum all their own. That's why you need to understand where you've been and where you are, if you want any idea where you're going. Can you give another example? She kept her back straight, looking him in the eyes. It seemed like a safe question. After all, these were prepared lessons. If she just put him on the spot, maybe that would make the others see her point. All right. Warwick sighed and shifted his weight, hiding a wince as he did. She'd heard the stories around campus. He clearly hadn't been cut in half, but even so, she felt compassion. A man had been hurt. Even if it was an older alien man who was really annoying her. So the year we're discussing is 1910, Desala. Yes, sir, she nodded promptly. It might be a stall. It certainly felt like he was stalling. In 1910, a human named Mohandas Gandhi was a citizen of the British Empire. He was born in the territory of India, pursued an education in the British system, and was admitted to the bar in 1891 as a lawyer, our version of an advocate. Warwick cocked his head, though he didn't seem to be asking a question, unless it was to see if she was listening. Gandhi struggled to make a law practice work. It wasn't a lack of skill. He had the right citizenship and education, but the wrong skin color, wrong culture, wrong tribe. Gandhi was seen as an outsider, something less, and before you tell me that I'm talking about a person instead of a province, let me get back to the point. That cultural identity matters. By 1910, Gandhi was working in South Africa, advocating for the civil liberties of minorities in the empire. It's telling because when he arrived, he famously remarked that he considered himself a Briton first and an Indian second, and by the time he left, the inequalities he'd seen made him question that idea. By 1915, he was back in India, beginning the non-violent work that would culminate with India's independence from the British Empire. Warwick waited a moment. It was a case of cultural identity exerting an influence that would not be denied. Some people don't take well to annexation, and if you deny them their identity, it will come back around. Does that answer your question, Desala? Desala shook her head slightly. The answer was clear enough, but if she just accepted it as given, then that wouldn't be Socratic? No, sir. Doesn't that make this Gandhi person a rebel, even if it was non-violent? You could see it that way, but Gandhi took the path he did because the rights of others were denied, not recognized. Warwick poked at his omnipad, and a picture came on the classroom screen of a wizened old human male, wrapped in what looked like bedsheets of all things. If the Empire wanted to encourage inclusion and recognize excellence, Gandhi could have become a baron in India. Instead, the British made the same mistake as the Romans. They never invested the people they governed in an identity as citizens, and eventually the empire fell apart. The moment is always upon you. Warwick was looking around the class, and his eyes were over at Desi and Malondi just now, addressing them all, as if her question was settled. The Japanese and British empires did what they did because it had always been done that way. They never questioned it. When events in Korea and India rolled over on their successors, it may have seemed like a calamity of the moment, but in reality, it was just the tide coming in. You need to decide now who you want to be later, but you can decide. Warwick glanced over at Melondi. Exercise agency in your lives and what you do. It doesn't matter if it happens in 100 years or 1,000. When the moment arrives, it's too late for whoever is sitting on the throne. Once the avalanche starts, the rocks don't get a vote. Other questions? Warwick asked. Desala sat there trying to process the answer. Agency? If she hadn't been exercising agency, the whole class would be snacking on poison this morning. How dare he question her about acting with agency? Alright, fine. He didn't know, but still. Other questions? Warwick looked around, just as the clock hit the top of the hour. Yes, Tessie? Sir, I wanted to ask if you brought the file for the movie tonight? Dershim bit her lip, grinning. Talk about the teacher's pet. According to Letzi, she was literally Pellavon's daughter now. Oh, and Nesva had a question. Now class is over? All right. Class dismissed. Come on down, girls. Warwick grimaced. Are you sure about this? Lark waited in the common room after dinner. It was movie night, after all, but Melondi, gracious goddess, she had to keep thinking that way, had made a special request. The guards hidden away watching her wanted a movie. Actual Death's Head commandos watching a movie over her shoulder by hidden camera. Alright, fine. It was fine. It made sense. But even so, goddess, some of the things they talked about without knowing, and sharing out part of the chocolate fund too. Alright, they had come to the rescue after Warwick was stabbed. They were waiting in the wings somewhere near to keep her safe, which meant keeping them all safe. We'd better get more Nutella, she grumbled, arms clenched against her chest as she slouched down on the sofa. Somewhat? Bree rounded the corner, grinning at her like she was on the menu. She felt her mouth go dry as Bree dropped down beside her, the smile whiter than ever. I'm doing this. Goddess, I can't believe I'm doing this. Bree, so, thanks for coming. She tried to smile. Why was her heart hammering in her chest? There are some things we have to talk about before movie night. You know, things. And stuff? Yeah, your friends say that a lot. I'm good. Bree slipped an arm along the back of the couch, not quite around her shoulder, and smiled. So, talk to me. Okay. Lark turned to face her. I know I'm blushing. Why am I blushing? She should be blushing. Right, so you've made it pretty clear you're really interested in me, and I'm flattered. Lark doled her words out slowly. It didn't sound right, but it was a lot better than, you're actually 2 years younger than me, which really doesn't mean anything, but I'm not a noble and just hiding here as a reporter in disguise. The thought had been running around her mind for 2 weeks now, and despite deciding to settle this like two adults when the time came, she was still where she started. She wasn't worthy. Bree's noble family would have a fit over the deception. Women usually found a husband and then formed a family bond. Yet Bree wasn't taking no for an answer. I guess I don't know why. I've watched you for months now, and you're on top of things. Bree still hadn't lost that smile, but she perched her chin on one hand, gazing at her. You're good with people. You're smart, pretty, insightful, and you aren't arrogant like a lot of these bitches. I think you're going places, and I want to be there as your co, if you let me. Just like that? Lark couldn't keep the surprise out of her voice. She was a nobody. This time last year, she'd been living in a cramped apartment, thankful for a job at the backup night desk. Just like that, Bree nodded. Look, I know there are things we don't know about each other, but I'd like you to give me a try. She has no idea, but she didn't make it a question. This is crazy. A couple of things, yeah, Lark started. Bree's smile just grew wider as she pounced. Sure thing, babe. I'm all ears. I'm a covert reporter covering a human, and I discovered a murder plot against a princess who may be our next empress. And hey, I'm going out to a brothel tomorrow. How about we start slow? Tonight there's this thing called chocolate. She offered another smile. Bree was casually tugging one of her ponytails while she listened. We don't talk about the chocolate. Discretion, got it. Sounds like a good start. Bree nodded amiably. So what are we watching tonight, anyway? We've been watching human films. Lark bit her lip uncertainly. It's sort of a special request tonight. Something called Apocalypse Now? Neat. How old is it? I guess it's a couple of decades old, Lark shrugged. Well, no apocalypse happened, Bree grinned and leaned in close. How bad could it be? Two audiences. In the dorm, Melondi seemed to be hanging on, and her friends had struck it out. Mostly. The new girl had left to throw up, while another went to help her. In the bunker, Marines would have just eyed the men, but they were death's heads. The chatter was more technical, over tactics and primitive air cavalry mixed with catcalls over the men, and hoots over the action. Kalira and her friends had never seen combat. They were students. They had no idea. But Kalira was their princess, and she seemed to be watching out of grim determination. Tala wondered what lessons she was learning as the film went on. We train young men to drop fire on people, but their commanders won't allow them to write fuck on their airplanes, because it's obscene. Oh, no, oh. Sergeant Diani buried her head in her hands as the pause crowded together to watch. Blood flew in the darkness. That is just fucked up. Lieutenant Tala tried to keep her breathing steady. Flashes of her last deployment kept playing through her head. The music of the crowd slaughtering an animal that faded into an assassin in the darkness, like screams that turned to silence as atmosphere bled into space. Was it wrong for the women in the bunker to be getting off on the movie? The guys were hot. Men in uniform always used to do it for her too. Maybe it was because they'd watched these human films for weeks now. In their heads, they made the leap to seeing gender turned upside down. And they were death's heads. After months of isolation, seeing a combat film, any combat film, seemed to fire their spirits. They were laughing at the absurdity as if the surreal were normal. The cute guys only completed the picture. That was fine for them. But for her? No. The girls in the dorm looked just as sickened. There was still an island of normal. She was a death's head commando. She'd seen combat. She wasn't going to lose it. She wasn't. She was not. Silhouetted in firelight, the face of a man lay in the pool of his own blood, whispering. She'd seen that look. His eyes were open but no longer seeing, like a body floating in vacuum. The horror. The horror. Tala made it to the fresher, just in time to throw up. In the end, Letzi and Nessa begged off going out to the tide pool so they could put their heads together over Warwick's interview. The ride into the city had been boisterous enough, except for Belda. Huddled next to Liam, she'd been blushing before he even arrived. He'd been irrelevant the whole ride into the city. She looked ready to faint. The death's heads sitting in the corners, Jalki and Diani had done their best to look dour and competent, but the constant questions from Lark and Sephir were wearing them down, and Jalki had already started to crack a smile.
So, everyone remember that's why we're going,
Desi summed up. Not that everyone didn't already know.
Mel has important business to see to.
In a brothel, Liam grinned. Belda sank a little lower in her chair.
Hey, that's how it worked out,
Desi shrugged, not looking particularly bothered by the whole idea. So, where are we going? Belda looked ready to disappear through the floor of the autocab, and Liam slid his hand over hers and squeezed. I mean, I know where we're going, but I don't know what it's like. Belle hasn't taken me there. Belda squeaked like venting atmosphere as Sergeant Diani started to snicker, but Desi took it in stride.
Anaxatori is one of the newer districts of the capital. New by comparison, I guess. About 300 years ago, one of the empresses had this idea to get rid of corrupting influences.
Sitting beside Desi, Melondi muttered,
Empress Apavola.
Yeah, Desi paused. Wasn't she called Apavola the Chaste?
Desi,
Melondi sighed. Desi looked at her and shrugged before leaning forward again.
Anyway, Apavola got it into her head to expel anyone seen as a corrupting influence from the heart of the city. So all the actors and religious folks from the periphery worlds, basically anyone interesting, entertaining, or different enough to count, just relocated.
Desi ticked points off her fingertips the way she did in study group.
It doesn't have a lot of history, or at least nothing important, but it's a pretty lively place. Anyway, even with everything else there, you still can't miss the tide pool.
Cool. Guess I'm not in Kansas anymore, though my sister better not find out, Liam grinned.
How do you know it's going to be fine if you don't know where we're going?
Belda looked at her date in wonder. Hey, I'm with you. I know you'll take care of me. Liam leaned into her. Belda looked down at him as he nuzzled into her while the other girls grinned. Pris just leaned in and nudged her in the ribs.
Come on, Belle. It's all good. Anyway, so somebody tell me about this place. It's the biggest... Not just that, it's the most expensive, Desi shrugged. Anyone with the credits knows it offers the widest variety of entertainments.
Diani chuckled, and Desi only sniffed.
What? They aren't perversions. When most sentient species in the Imperium are, broadly biologically compatible with each other, but can't interbreed? No wonder they draw big money. Even people from off-shield know about the tide pool. It figures.
Sitting beside the twins, Jacksby nodded, drinking it all in.
I mean, it's legal, and a market like that, somebody was going to make it pay. If brothels were temples, the tide pool would be the Grand Templar Shill in the Imperial Garden, Desi said matter-of-factly.
Desi? Melondi looked at her friend incredulously. The twins looked like they were deciding to hyperventilate. The tide pool lay in the centre of its grounds beyond a long drive, encircling a pond that could pass for a small lake. Brightly lit fountains played in sequence to music wafting through the trees, though it was cold enough that pedestrians walking to the entry didn't linger. Painted a vibrant purple and gold, it gleamed in the spotlights that played lightly over the exterior, easily 8 stories tall, and who knew how far down. The pond only drew attention to the sign at the entry, which framed a well-known statue of Empress Mayadi. Named Mayadi at the tide pool, it showed her stepping naked into the rising tide, and embracing her equally naked husband. The piece was famous, and the example at the entry was a wonderful copy, executed in loving and graphic detail.
Desi, if you start an art lesson, I'm going to murder you, Lark muttered as they walked past. The twins stood and stared, but raced to catch up as the group continued to the entrance. By unspoken accord, Melondi was in the dead center, with Liam and Belder just beside her. Protecting him went without saying, though having Sergeant Jelk and Sergeant Diania a few steps close behind didn't hurt anyone as a reminder. This was serious business. "Come in, do come in," a Helcom couple cooed, and beckoned them forward as they arrived. Under the atmospheric curtain, it was warm and inviting, and they wore matching green outfits the colour of sea foam, and almost as transparent. "The tide pool brings something for everyone." Joining the crowd of women, and a few men passing through the entry, one of the twins leaned in, whispering, "That was a woman dressed as a man." "And a man dressed as a woman," the other Kerbal nodded frantically. "Goddess, what kind of place is this?" The entry gave way to a long tunnel that looked like natural rock, leading visitors down towards the brightly lit space at the end. Holographs show figures of both sexes and every species available, posed in every variation anatomically possible. "Great! Of course they have a menu app," Jaxmy chirped, though it sounded forced. "There's every combination you can imagine." The twins started to hyperventilate, staring everywhere at once, while Pris shook her head. "I won't even guess how many species there are. Males and females. Multiple combinations." Melondi had started slowly blushing as they pressed deeper down the hall, muttering, "This is work. This is work." They emerged into a vast courtyard, leading down to a faux pool that surrounded a stage. Tables filled the space, while galleries lined the walls above. They had rich curtains of dark purple that could be drawn closed. "Huh. It's kind of like the auditorium back at school," Desi offered. Mel looked ready to rebuke her, but looked around a bit more. It really was similar. "Well now, my name is Haram. How can the tide pool entertain you ladies?" The question came from a young short man at the entry. Wearing a lace collar that draped just over his chest, a smile, and a tight pair of shorts that left little else to the imagination. We're here for dinner." Melondi stepped forward. "A table for 13, please." "Just follow me," Haram bowed, making the lace collar do very interesting things above his chest. His eyes flickering over Liam a moment before he led them through the crowd, light playing over his bare back. Looking around, Lark leaned in and rolled her eyes off to the left, whispering, "Mel, isn't that—" "Shh! I see at least 5 duchesses, and they aren't even hiding who they are," Melondi whispered back, slinking a little lower in the middle of the group. Reaching the table, the host gestured for them to sit with a flourish. Actual living waiters, who wore even less than their host, were already bringing platters of finger food. "Your waiter is Gerard. He'll be with you shortly." He allowed his dazzling smile to linger momentarily on each of them. "Is there anything else I can get you?" Mel drew herself up and nodded. "Yes, please send the manager to see me," she said as confidently as she could. Haram's golden eyes flickered over the group. "Bodyguards, and another human. It's a little unusual, but I'll let him know." After a moment he asked, "Who shall I say is asking?" "Princess Kalira Tazu," she replied evenly. Haram's expression faltered, but he recovered quickly. His dazzling smile slid neatly back, and he bowed to her again, this time standing between the chairs of the twins, whose shade of blue had gone all the way to azure as their eyes slipped below his collar. He straightened up with a coy smile, eyes lingering on the sisters for a moment, then turned on his heel and vanished into the crowd. With nothing else to do, they tucked into the food, which was delicious.
There were Cambrian oysters in orid sauce, baked guara with tosip, and a variety of dried nuts. While delicious, it was just the kind of food that was supposed to make you thirsty. Illuminated on the table, the display provided a wealth of options.
You can buy tokens.
Jemy stared at the menu, swiping from one screen to the next,
to tip the waiters and the entertainment and rent the...
Oh. She stared closer, even though the menu was right in front of her.
Nyosa's tits, look at the prices. Even the cheapest is... Shit. They go up to 10,000 credits. We're just going to have to fake it.
Melondi looked at the others, embarrassed.
I'm sorry. I'll try and pay you back, but we have to blend in.
Hearing a Chelkser complain about money got them all looking. Belda looked like she was going to choke.
Liam, oh goddess, this is humiliating, but...
No worries, I'm not an expensive date, but damn, this is insane. Desi, you weren't kidding, he whispered. Hey, what do you think he meant by another human? After ordering a few small appetizers and a couple of shared meals, the food went quickly. Liam seemed to be the only one even partly full. There were pained looks as stomachs rumbled. Desi was looking around when she nudged Mel in the ribs.
Why did you tell them who you are? You got us the clothes to blend in, but in this crowd? If I didn't say something, they'll never come see us, Kalira whispered back. Besides, you said what happens here stays here. I might as well say I'm Kalira. That explains why this person you're tracking came here for a meeting, I guess. Pris offered, and went back to chatting with Sephir. The athletic girl had been talking with a pair of death's heads all evening, leaving the issue of bodyguards covered. I mean, if people keep each other's secrets, we're better. Maybe. I think you got someone's attention, Desi said.
Following her friend's gaze, Kalira saw a Shorvanti man working his way across the room. He paused from time to time to run a handle on the shoulders of some woman or other, or share something that caused a laugh, clearly making sure everyone was having fun. He was dressed in black slacks and after a minute was only a few steps from the table. It was only when he drew close that Jemy hissed, "That's a silk shirt."
Well spotted by a lady of taste, and I am Alrada. I'm told you asked to see me?
He smiled, striking an artful pose with an easy grace. Hiram had turned over his duties to another host, and was lingering at Alrada's side, pulling out a chair for his patron.
I'm surprised, but word is getting around. I acquired several scarves lately, and I had just enough purple to make this shirt. You like?
Jemy looked like she was having trouble finding words, and Kalira laid a hand on her arm.
It's very pretty, but we're here on business. I need to speak with you.
Of course, Princess. I must admit I was surprised, but I looked up some of your older pictures. You've bloomed into a lovely young woman, he said, folding gracefully into the empty chair and favouring Melondi with a dazzling smile.
He slipped a hand up Melondi's arm, oblivious of the death's heads who were suddenly all business, and his smile turned into a frown.
You're wearing body armour. I don't mind bodyguards, but if you've come for trouble, then it's time to leave.
Kalira didn't look fazed, and licked her lips briefly.
I didn't come to cause problems. The times are dangerous. You've seen the news about Princess Satora?
Sensible precautions are one thing, so long as that's all. Samilla has said the nicest things about you.
Alrada mused, his eyes lingering on the twins and Liam for a few moments, before inclining his head and casually waving towards some of the alcoves. He looked at her proudly, lifting his chin.
I have 2 teams of Rakiri security. I ensure they have boyfriends here, so they have no sense of humor about any rough stuff. Now, how can I help you?
A few years ago, A member of the interior named Jurale Aterak was murdered here. Kalira leaned in. The other girls were looking around, and no other tables were close. I need to ask some questions. It's a matter of life or death. No, dear, no. A private citizen named Jurale Aterak was found dead here. Arada raised an eyebrow. What happens here stays here. Whatever she was outside of my establishment is no concern of mine. I take your point, Kalira nodded. Still, I need to ask about this private citizen. You have the interior at your disposal? Arada canted his head gracefully. Why not just read their report? I may have reason not to trust some reports these days. Kalira glowered at her plate, embarrassed. I see. Samilla says she sometimes misses the old days. Arada mused. I only have this club, but she always looks out for me, and she's such a good neighbor, in a manner of speaking. Very well. What do you want to know? Jurale, has she ever been in here before as a customer? No. We don't have fatalities here, aside from an occasional heart attack with our older clients. Arada waved gracefully at the crowd. I try to provide personal attention to our most discerning guests, but we get a few thousand a week. However, before you ask, for such an exceptional tragedy, I checked our records, which stay private. Jurale had never been our guest before that evening. Can you tell me anything more? Kalira asked hopefully. Actually, yes. We don't have camera footage that lasts beyond the evening. Our clients understand security, but there are limits. Arada pointed discreetly to some of the dark corners of the hall. Jurale arrived and met with a woman already seated in the alcove over there, who was wearing a cloak over her head. She touched nothing and kept her head down. Silver hair, but there wasn't a decent picture of her to be had. Desi frowned and leaned in. She'd been quietly listening up to that point. Isn't that unusual? I mean, being dressed up like that? Very. We don't let the tide get cold. It's bad for business. Arada nodded ever so slightly toward the entrance, as she gestured to the host behind him. Hiram was just starting back then. He seated her. She said she didn't want any food and tipped well. It was good money, Hiram nodded. Hard credits. No electronic transaction. All right, so she met with a cloaked woman over there. What happened? The lights came up on the stage before music rushed over the crowd. Women in the audience started to stamp and cheer. That's the Kinks? Come dancing? Desi whispered, as the dancers appeared. The men gliding on stage were all human. As the music kicked off, the lyrics flashed over the stage in chill. The Kinks? How apropos. You're an unusual one. Most of our clients don't seem to care. Not about the music, anyway. Arada purred at Desi, before looking at Liam and Belder. At least now I see why they talk about leaving your hat on. Aren't you just a lucky girl? Belder's mouth moved, but words weren't coming out. And Alrada arched an eyebrow at Kaslan and Kamara. And twins? Two of our boys are very similar. If you like, we could sell tickets. For a wonder, the Kerbal sisters didn't even notice. Aside from Jalki and Diani, who were doing their best, eyes were glued to the stage. The men there didn't just seem to dance. They strutted, posed, and contorted in ways they hadn't thought possible. Princess, are you listening? You look light years away. I'm fine. Kalira had already turned bright blue, and she jumped in her seat. Fine. They are distracting, aren't they? He laughed. The one in the front is Thomas. He says he's a deposed prince from the Empire of London. They're Chippendales, Liam blurted, frowning up at the stage. Prince of London my ass. And I can dance better than that. That's
That's just synchronized posing.
Do tell. As you'd imagine, I'm not keen on audience participation, but in your case, I'd make an exception.
Liam, you can't.
Belda was clutching her chest and looked like she was going to have a fit.
Goddess, if your sister finds out we were even here, please?
It's cool, Belle. They're moving around a lot and their shirts are coming off, but it's not like anything is really happening up there. Liam leaned forward. Tell you what, how about a dance-off? I win and the girls don't pay their tab all night.
Amusing.
Alrada grinned impishly, leaning back to his aide.
Haram, tell Revan to take our brash young guest backstage and have a word with the boys. Tell Thomas I'll double his tips if he wins. And if he loses, he handles Lady Cash's table the next time she's in.
Belda's eyes were wide as saucers, but Liam grinned wolfishly as he leaned down and kissed her cheek. You ladies ordered the best steaks on the menu. I'll be back after I kick this guy's ass.
He certainly has confidence. Of course, that does leave the question of what I get if you lose.
Alrada leaned back, watching him leave, before glancing over at the twins.
Though I can think of some options.
Jax leaned forward.
I've got a business proposition. You've heard of the new Silk Road?
The Silk Company, he said,
leaning back and caressing his shirt.
It's the talk of the town, my dear. You wouldn't believe the favors I had to pull to get enough dark purple for a shirt.
It just so happens I know the owner, Jack smiled. If we lose, I'll get her to cut you in for 5% on a new product called a bikini.
5% of something I don't know about isn't worth anything. 10% and 10 silk shirts.
7 if we lose and 3 if we win. You cover getting the word out. And 5 shirts.
Jax held a fist up.
Done! Now this will be an evening to remember.
Alrada bumped Jax's fist delicately before sitting forward and smiling winsomely at Kalira.
Samilla always told me to cultivate friends in high places. This may be the beginning of a mutually beneficial acquaintance. So, while we wait for your boy to go up on stage, is there anything else I can help you with?
Not much. I have a picture, but it doesn't sound like it will help with the cloaked woman.
Really? Let me have a look.
Harem leaned forward.
Nothing was on camera, but I had a good view. I haven't forgotten her face.
Melondi felt hope bloom in her chest. This was proof. Before leaving the palace, she copied the file. She pulled up her Omnipad and opened it, and she held up the screen to show a close-up photo of Kadira Sariva.
No.
Harem shook his head.
Sorry, but that's not her. She had silver hair, and it wasn't a wig or a dye job.
Trust him. He'd know.
Alrada shrugged sympathetically. All right, ladies, the MC crowed as the spotlight hit the stage. We have an extra tasty treat for you tonight. All the way from planet Earth in a dance competition with our very own Thomas. Be still my heart as you give it up for Liam, the grand poobah of Sexsmith. The light rose as the music started to play. The cadence quickly began to grind, as did Liam. The lyrics started playing out over the audience. Your hands brush past mine in electric light. You're dancing like you're mine.
Belda, are you all right?
Belda's mouth was hanging open, and Lark laid a hand on her arm. A few seconds later, Liam's tie flew from the stage and hit Belle in the chest. Can't keep this inside. Don't pretend you're blind. It's time to cross the line.